Hello, welcome to Wrestling and Everything, Coast to Coast, with your host, Buddy Sotelo, Esquire, and Dr. Mike Lano. Dr. Mike, would you like to introduce our guest for today?
I do, and he's put out a book on a family I was very close to from the Detroit days in 1975-76. The book, and I'm surprised no one has done a book on the Macho Man. Hopefully you guys can see this. Macho Man, The author, John Finkel. Not related, as Lanny Poffo found out and sort of quizzed him on to our Howard Finkel, who we lost a couple of years ago. Macho Man, The Untamed, Unbelievable Life of Randy Savage.
John, do you have a copy? Do you have a copy of the book?
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. That we can see.
Does it better with him.
Very good.
I'm review, hopefully, because I still work for the few newsstand Mark magazines we have left, Pro Wrestling Illustrated in this country, Inside the Ropes, and Wrestle Talk. This is Wrestle Talk that's still around in the UK. Both of those are produced in the UK. And, of course, Boxy Lucha in Mexico, Shukan Pro, Shukan Weekly in Japan. John, it's if you would have called me, or if you would have somehow contacted me, because I think I don't know when you moved to Florida, which is the land of Poffo, other than Kentucky, but you would have called me. I would have given you Lanny's contacts and prior
Ecuador. Don't forget Ecuador.
Yeah, well, that's where
I spoke. That's where I ended up talking to him from. He was in Ecuador.
The weirdest, the craziest thing, and that's what we were very close. Like when I had my Sam Munchnick 3-day weekend for the boys, I told you about that convention, which was a 3-day deal in '91, and then in '92, Lanny brought in both times the girlfriend that he was seeing in Florida. Was living in his parents, Judy and Angelo's condo place. His girlfriend was a massage therapist, and he knew I was stressed out. So she was legit, would untense my shoulders and neck, because that's a lot of stress running a 48-hour marathon and all this stuff. But and also Pampero Firpo. So this relates to the book. Pampero Firpo was a guy in Detroit who was one of those crazy man chic Eddie Farhat characters that he helped create, like Abdul the Butcher. And all the crazy wrestlers in the world were there. But when the Poffos came in, and first father Angelo, along with son Lanny, who had bleached blonde hair at the time, were the tag champions, world tag champs for the Sheik, the world tag champions only in the Detroit promotion, which is insane. Randy would be in the openers, but Randy idolized Pampero Firpo, who did his closing tagline was, "Oh yeah," in this deep growling voice. He adopted that. But anyway, so I'd always stayed in touch with Lanny, got each of his poetry books when they came out. And then in 2015, when Randy went into WWE's Hall of Fame, long delay there, a lot of speculation I'm sure you delved into. I haven't finished the book, but Lanny listed myself and Pampero Firpo's daughter, Mary Ketchmanian, as friends and family. He wanted me to photograph. I was sitting like third row behind like Molly Holly and Trish Stratus and Lita there, if you look at it. So he wanted me to take pictures of him on stage accepting for his brother.
So, hey, John, can you tell us how you got started in writing your book and what made you start putting together that Randy Savage biography?
Back to when he was a teen.
Yeah, I wanted to write it. From as long as I've wanted to write books, I've wanted to write a Randy Savage book. So this is my 10th book. Like you'd mentioned earlier, a lot of books on other athletes, other teams, mainstream sports, and I had always had this idea of how I wanted to do the Randy Savage biography. I also knew what it would entail. When you write one of these books, you understand. You're talking about a year and a half, sometimes 2 years, hundreds of sources and interviews and thousands of research papers and newspaper articles and all the things you want to undergo. So it wasn't like you don't tackle it first, right? You don't climb Mount Everest as your first hike. You build up to it, And I knew that I had always held him in such high esteem from growing up in I kind of grew up in the perfect age of the Macho Man golden age. I was 8, 9 years old at WrestleMania 3. I was all in, by the time he's facing Warrior and Mega Powers and all these things, 9, 10, 11.
Makes me feel so old now.
I believed everything, right? I was at the age where like every single thing that was happening, I believed in what was going on. There was no thought for me that it wasn't happening when Warrior and Macho faced off for us. I believed the retirement match. I believe one of them was never going to wrestle again, right? Like that's how in I was. And so when I finally got old enough to start writing books as a career, I just had this in the back of my mind. And one of the things you said earlier, Mike, like I still can't believe, thankfully, no one had done this. And so when I got to a point where I felt confident and comfortable enough to tackle it, and I put the proposal together, the only caveat I had was that I wanted to make sure I was able to talk to Lanny back when he was alive. This is all in 2021. So it took me a while to get a hold of him. A guy he knew, maybe you know too, JP Zarka at Pro Wrestling Stories.
Oh yeah.
I interviewed.
Yes.
Yeah, I interviewed
Friend
JP.
of the show. He's been on the show a number of times.
Oh, great. So I interviewed JP for 1996 for that reference, the chapter you referenced for the Rock and Stone Cold chapter in that book. And he was like my first guy I reached out to. We got along well. And I knew he had done a Facebook thing with Lanny and some podcasts. So it was a pretty easy connection. And then it took a full year to actually get Lanny pinned down to talk to. And as I told you off air, he asked me if I was related to Howard Finkel, and told him my dad was Harvey Finkel, so we had the same initials, so maybe that was something. And he laughed. He liked coincidences and wordplay like that. And then we talked for like 2.5, 3 hours, and he answered every possible thing that I could have asked him to. And I kept a running list of questions for when we were going to talk again. And then JP texted me sadly on the day he passed, and I dedicate the book to him. I would not have done it if I didn't talk to him. I would have felt just silly, frankly. He was the only guy who was a go or no go. If I talked to him, I would do it. If I couldn't, I wouldn't. And so he was critical to so many parts, especially in the beginning of the book, about Randy's mindset for a lot of these things.
He was a guest on our show too. We had Lanny on the show as well.
Evan Ginsberg, who booked all the wrestlers for the movie The Wrestler, the Mickey Rourke thing. Mm-hmm. He and I have been very close to Lanny, me a little bit longer, but I had thought when Lanny passed, because he came, I think was it December, January when he died? It was really super cold, and he's coming because when he first moved to South America, and he said that was something he said he might have told you this, he always wanted to do. He wanted to get away from Florida. Once Judy, his mom, passed away, as you cover in the book, he went, but he was, when he initially moved there, he was on the beach. And a couple of years later, he bought another place where that was his primary residence. It was like way high elevation. And I thought, all right, he's coming from high elevation on a nonstop to New York or Jersey, whichever airport it was, in the freezing cold. And I thought maybe it had something to do with his heart, because he had Firpo's daughter and I both were trying to speculate what could have caused this. Did you come across, I don't know if you researched his death?
Yeah, I did. Nobody releases anything, and he wasn't, I don't know, like Macho, there was a police report and all these things that happened because of the way he passed away. Lanny, they think, heart attack or something along those lines, the way it was. We don't know the beating these guys took, the lifestyle they had for so long. So many of them. When I was writing it, I would tell, anyone who was asking me the progress of it, it's like, it was awesome and an amazing nostalgic trip down memory lane. But so many times I think of, who'd be great to talk to, and they passed away, right? I mean, it was just this list of obviously Elizabeth and Randy, but then Junkyard Dog and so many of these people as you go through that they're not here anymore. It would have been great to be able to get a hold of them and get in touch with them. So luckily I did get that time.
Just wait a minute, Russ. Did you talk to Hustler Rip Rogers? He was real close.
I talked to Rip. I talked to Rip for a long time, several times.
Yeah, he's a straight shooter, good guy. I like the fact that it's also a book too, if you're an older fan, a fan of his dad, Angelo, and it's also like a book on Lanny. So it's three people in one. I was looking at it and I thought, before I crack this, if he has a chapter on Angelo, I hope it's just simply titled 6033.
Well, almost close enough, right?
Yeah, you were close enough, because it was impressive, because for decades, Angelo would wear that on the back of whatever robes he had. When I ring announced him in that Gordon Scazzari fiasco thing, it was insane. We were doing tag team ring introductions, him the heels, me the faces, and he had that on the back and the front. Yeah. So it was very important. He was super proud of it. Here's a guy who, because Gorgeous George, as you know, Gorgeous George helped him early on in his career. And when Gorgeous George broke, penniless George Wagner, Angelo Poffo paid for the funeral.
Well, Gorgeous George is the reason that we have Randy Savage, right? I mean, that they have this fateful discussion that he talks about in interviews, and Lanny kind of filled me in on as well, where he was done. Angelo was done. He had 2 kids. The safe thing to do, he had a degree in education, was for he and Judy to get jobs teaching and raise their kids somewhere and get rid of wrestling. And Gorgeous George talked him out of it, told him, no, you have it, just keep going. And, who knows? And I think it's pretty safe to say if Randy and Lindy don't grow up in a wrestling type household, there's a good chance that they don't go into it. I mean, so many of these wrestlers, especially of that generation, were the second generation, or at least grew up tangentially around wrestling. If Angelo quits when, Randy's in third grade, do we get Randy Savage? I don't think so. So yeah, Gorgeous George played a huge part in what we now know. And obviously pomp and circumstance and, being a historian of wrestling, I think he was because of his father. But that's a real pivotal moment for all of wrestling, really.
And one thing before I forget is Angelo's tag team partner, the longest tag team partner, the one he won all these championships with in the Omaha and for Vern, et cetera, was Chris Markoff, who just passed recently, like a week and a half ago.
Some of those guys were really impressive. I mean, Vern, these guys were like old school impressive, like, college wrestlers, college football players, military guys, like they were true blue tough guys who then went into the ring. Whereas now everybody's, playing a tough guy in the ring.
Well, John, I wanted to know what things did you learn about the Apofo family that you didn't expect when you went through the research in this book? What are some of the things that you learned about them?
Well, I didn't know very much about Randy's childhood and how Angelo's life as a wrestler informed him. I think, picture your very nice small town anywhere in America, and one of your friend's dads who you play Little League with or whatever is this wrestler who's on TV all the time, who shows up at your friend's baseball games wearing a Speedo and flip-flops and no shirt, who dyes his hair blonde, who, drives a Corvette with no, top down.
Yellow.
Well, your dad,
yellow.
Yeah, well, your dad comes home from work as a button-up shirt and khakis, and, he may be amazing, but he's probably maybe a little boring. And then your friend down that, the only pool in town is at the Papa's house. The only gym in town is at, the Papa's have the weight room downstairs. Like the only batting cage, it's a personal batting cage in Downers Grove, is built on the side of Randy and Landy's house so that they can practice. So just the idea of how into all this stuff that they were, I had no clue. And then when you get into the first part of Randy's life, I open with Angelo because it informs who Randy becomes and what his influences were and why he was into bodybuilding and fitness and into wrestling. But really, the baseball, the obsession with baseball for much of his early life, from grade school to middle school to high school on into when he got into the minor leagues. I mean, I'd always just figured that, while he was playing baseball and getting into baseball, he had wrestling in the back of his mind. Obviously, that was like an automatic plan B. But when you read about Landy and research about Randy, Landy says, and Randy, as you hear all his quotes, there was no plan B. He was baseball or bust until the very minute that he realized the dream was finally dead. He did not have one side, one foot in each side of the fence. He was not playing, if this doesn't work, no big deal. His life and dreams were crushed when he fell out of baseball. And it was only then, he had done a couple spot shows here and there for fun just because he could. But it was only after baseball was completely and totally done and the door was shut that he began thinking about wrestling. I don't know. We don't know many people who completely and totally reinvent themselves, putting a dream aside, just literally to bed forever and doing something completely different and becoming a superstar of all time.
Of course, we're talking to John Finkel, spelled Finkel, just like Howard. Yep. The book, Macho Man, The Unbelievable Life of Randy Savage. One thing, and I have the program, I'll have to dig and find it and send it to you. Randy was on early on with his dad and brother undercard for Pete Rose's wife, later became his ex-wife, since you've written a bunch of books on, baseball and NBA and NFL stars. Mean Joe Green, a big deal, because Bret Hart and Vince McMahon Jr. copied that famous TV Coke ad with Joe Green. But they were on this card that Pete Rose's wife was in Ohio, loved wrestling, so she teamed together with the Sheik again when they were in there, and they were on this undercard, which is kind of insane because right in the newspaper ads, and I have the clippings, it says Mrs. Pete Rose is promoting this once-in-a-lifetime wrestling show in Toledo or Cincinnati. You talk about renegades and outlaws in the book. There's a whole chapter. Their ICW, Kentucky-based promotion, not only pissed off Jerry Jarrett, they were opposition and they were trading barbs and saying all this stuff about the more established Jerry Jarrett former Nick Goulas promotion, but they syndicated the show out. Lanny didn't even know, nor did Randy. We got it in San Francisco and LA, my two home bases at the time when the ICW was running, and they would cut and insert localized promos trashing the local wrestlers, like the promoter Roy Shire, Ray Stevens, Pat Patterson, Rocky Johnson, Peter Mavie in San Francisco. And for the LA one, they would say, when we come to town, forget about Freddie Blassie and John Tolis and Bobo Brazil and Neil Moskowitz in Los Angeles. This is the real deal. And they would simply trash the promoter, piss everybody off, but they managed, and I'm sure you learned to discover, they made amends with Jerry Jarrett and were used, amazing feuds with the Rock and Roll Express and Jerry Lawler against Randy Savage, etc.
Yeah, they really made lemons out of lemonade on that one. From when you go back and dig through the newspaper articles at the time, they really didn't have a leg to stand on. They were just doing every possible guerrilla tactic known to man to drum up ticket sales. They would crash Lawler's shows. They would go to his house and do TV spots when they knew he wasn't home, threatening him. I mean, they did everything possible. And then eventually the straw that kind of killed the back of the ICW was they got booted from Rupp Arena forever. So that was where you could make a lot of money there on a regular basis. And then they started having a hard time booking anywhere because of their sort of low-level tactics. Then they sued everybody, and then they lost money. And, Angelo's, you would probably know, I mean, the way he ran the business from almost everybody who was involved, they had issues with his penny pinching ways and not pouring money in the right places and some of the decisions he made. And, the funny thing was he had built up this feud with Macho and Lawler for so long that if they had sat in a room somewhere and came up with an angle, it could not have been better. And so when they went out of business, Macho goes hat in hand and is like, well, we never got to, explore this. We never got to make money off this rivalry. What do you say we both make some money? And, they made him kind of gentleman's agreement, handshake. This is not a work. You're not going to use this somewhere. You're not going to use this to promote anything else. And then the rest is history for that territory.
Very emblematic. I think WWE, or WWF at the time, they sent in Triple H and DX on those tanks, and they went in and filmed where WCW was having the show. And you can draw a parallelism to what the Apophos did. I'm looking at the photos. I don't know if this is Dave Berzinski, who used to do the programs for the Sheik and was also the ringside photographer. When I'd go into there, I would always stand side by side with him. But this is Ernie Roth, the Grand Wizard of Wrestling, Abdullah Farouk, but the Grand Wizard for Vince McMahon Sr. with a young, I've never seen this photo, with a young Randy Poffo. I don't know if you but that's
I can't see the ones you're holding, but ECW, that was one of the reasons I wanted to work with them. They had access to a lot of great archives and photos for Macho Man. And yeah, I mean, he looks like a young Matthew McConaughey in some of these early pictures. And
so where'd you get that? To me, go to WWE or Pro Wrestling Illustrated, or where'd you go?
ECW, the publisher that I used for the book, had access to a lot of these, so that's why that's where those came from. I know they have relationships with a number of photographers.
John, did you watch a lot of matches to get ready for the book? Did you watch a lot of Randy Savage's matches?
I was able to essentially relive my entire childhood, and even better, my son is 11 and he was 9 when I started this book, and also already into wrestling. So over the course of writing this book, he and I watched all the WrestleManias, as many Saturday night main event and Sunday morning YouTube clips that we could find for all this stuff. So I gave him a full crash course of all of Macho Man's life and career in 6 months of videos. And
what was your favorite match?
My favorite match is always, and even then, and it's held up now, is him and Warrior when he actually loses to Ultimate Warrior. And the reason I like this match so much is because, having written the book and understanding who he was, Macho's biggest insecurity was his size. He was not one of these big dudes. Even Lanny was 6'2", 240, and he, Hulk Hogan was in high school already a giant. All the guys he wrestled were big men. They were they'd gone through their lives as big men. They were offensive linemen, and they were heavyweight wrestlers in high school or college. Randy, after baseball, was 6 foot, 6'1" ish. They listed him as, but 180, 185 pounds, skinny, nice ripped physique ab wise, but big forearms and nothing else. Small, skinny guy, built to whip a baseball bat around, not to wrestle. And so when he finally goes up against Warrior, he'd spent his whole career trying to look bigger than he was. He walked on his tippy toes and wore all the neon stuff, and he walked like he had Paul Roma says, bowling balls under his arms wherever he went, tried to take up space. But then he gets in the match of his life, really, against Warrior. And Warrior, when you rewatch it, makes him look like a kid. He's so much bigger than Macho Man. He's probably giving up 75, 80 pounds. He's twice as wide. When he gorilla presses him, it looks like me picking up my son. And Macho's ability to sell against a physical presence like that, because Warrior was far more athletic than Hogan and far more athletic than most of the guys he was going up against, that, whoever it was back in the day. And the way he goes with that match, and then what happens after that match with Elizabeth, everything in there, it ties together for me. So that's my favorite.
Let me ask very quickly, uncomfortable stuff that you might have had to, I don't know if there was pushback from Lanny, if you asked him about performance enhancers and
No,
Randy.
He was pretty open. He tried steroids for a long time. And Randy's goal, once he decided baseball was done and he wanted to move forward with wrestling, was to get big fast. And in the 70s, frankly, Arnold, Lou, they all took steroids. It wasn't like he was doing something strange. This is how you did it. And so Lanny admitted that he was on some combination of anabolic steroids for a little while. And he even admits it, even in the famous Arsenio, spot where, interview where he says, "Don't do it. It'll make you, get PMS." And he does make some jokes about it. So that was it. I think the part where, we didn't get too deep into, but it's clear is, when he plays Spider-Man later in his life, as a 46-year-old or whatever he was, and put on 40 pounds of muscle. I'm 46 and I lift a lot. I mean, to put on that amount of muscle in a short period of time, there's only really one way to do it, right? I mean, you can eat as much protein and steak and lift as much as you want, but at a certain point, you probably need a little help. But that was for a movie, not for a competition. So if he wanted to make that choice, he could.
The other thing I was going to ask about possible pushback was Randy was notorious. I saw it in person. Possessiveness of Liz, which cost him the marriage and all that. Was Lanny reluctant, or was he open about talking about that stuff if you guys talked about it?
Well, we touched upon it a little bit, mainly with the first time we talked, one of those documentaries had just come out where they really, it was one of those where like they spent 60% of it on like the last 2 years, WCW with Medusa and all them, and then on the Liz stuff. And it's like, that's like not talking about why people care about him at all, right? Like, let's get into like the real thing. And so, the Elizabeth stuff, I talked to a bunch of wrestlers about that backstage too. And you talked to Lanny, I talked to Lanny. The thing that goes with that is, from a possessive standpoint, I think what's most important, whether or not he locked her in a door at one point in time, there was clearly some people who mentioned that I talked to, like that he, there was no female locker room. They were in strange towns. She also was nervous about some of these places and who was going to be around, and they may not have a female to be with her. So who knows if she asked to lock it or he did. I don't think she was locked in the sense that like she was trapped or anything like that. But the issue is, and the way I've kind of couched it when this question comes up, when I think about it, is what's more important is that almost everybody would have believed that he would have done that, right? So whether he did it or not, almost 40 years later, 30 years later, is kind of inconsequential. The fact is, anyone who knew him, it was not a stretch to think he would have, which means he clearly was having issues with possessiveness and paranoia and stuff like that.
It's a huge Liz chapter. We're winding down. We've got 4 minutes, so I want to have you promote all of your stuff. But the book, Macho Man, The Untamed, Unbelievable Life of Randy Savage by author John Finkel. John, you put out books, a must-read, 1996, a biography, where you're covering the whole sports world, and there's a whole chapter on Stone Cold and The Rock in there, probably your first foray into wrestling. You did the book with Mean Joe. Mean Joe Green, that's the title of the book. Heart Over Height. There is as you said, 10 books you've done. Are you working on something right now? And let's have you give out all your social media.
Okay, yeah, I am. I can't announce the book just yet, but when I do, it's wrestling adjacent, so I'll be able to come on and we can talk about it. All my information, just go to johnfinkel.com, JONFINKEL.com. There you'll be able to sign up I have a newsletter called Books and Biceps, where I do author interviews with a lot of sports writers, a lot of wrestling writers, even too, novelists and things. So every week I share a book recommendation. I have exclusive author Q&As. I'm a meathead. That's why I love wrestling. So there's workouts and gym motivation in there. And then also updates on a lot of my books. I do a lot of giveaways and things like that. So go there, sign up for that. That's the number one way to get a hold of me. I'm on Twitter and Instagram at John_Finkel. If you get the book, definitely hit me up. Send me a screenshot. I've been giving away awesome. We have a great silver hologram on the cover, signed book plates that I can sign for you. So if you do buy it, pre-order it, or order it, DM me, shot of the order, and I will get you some cool macho swag.
So that's where we want to send folks primarily, is to your website.
Yeah, let him go. Everything's there. Everything is a whole Macho page, and then the book trailer is on my Twitter and on a Macho page on there. So yeah, watch the book trailer. Go to my Twitter page and go to the pinned tweet. Is the Macho book trailer is something I had the idea for this like the minute I signed on to do this book. I'm very proud of it. So you can go check that out.
And before I let you go, too, you have a number of people, Mark Cuban, major people, Kevin Durant, but Chef Robert Irvine, who have all supported you, endorsed your books. He's married to Gail Kim, famous pro wrestler. So that's kind of cool. I don't know if you knew that, but he's a big wrestling fan. He's been at some of the shows in support of her, the TNA Impact shows.
Yeah, I love Robert. I've known him. I've known Chef since I wrote for Muscle and Fitness. We did some features together way back when, and we've just one of the best parts about doing these kind of books is you stay in touch with people who you just kind of maybe meet once, but then you hit off in a conversation. And Chef's the best. He's a big fitness guy like I am. I get all his books. We stay in touch on Twitter whenever I'm doing something or he's doing something. So he's definitely one of my favorites and just a good dude. He gives just so much time and energy to charity and helping people out. And he's also, you know, like a jacked successful guy. One of my favorite kind of people.
Again, the book Macho Man, The Untamed, Unbelievable Life of Randy Savage from the #1 publisher globally of wrestling books, ECW Press. The author, John Finkel, JONFINKEL. And John, I know it's spring break for you and your sons, so we're going to let you go. Thank you so much, man.
Yeah, we'd really like to have you on again when you have your next book ready.
I'd love it. I will be in touch when that comes out. Probably, you know, books take forever, but when it does, I'll be in touch and we will definitely talk again.
All right, thank you.
Combate Kudasai. And with that, we will let John go. We'll see you next time right here on the show.
Coast to Coast with your host, Buddy Sotelo Esquire. And today we have in our second half of the show, we already got done with our previous interview, and now we're having a very special interview. I haven't had you on for quite some time. Robert Butch Haugh from Wrestling for Charity and also famous wrestling photographer as well from the
famous.
Yeah, you took pictures of some pretty important people, Christopher Daniels and Samoa Joe and you know, all the folks from APW, Dilip Singh and Mark Smith and Donovan Morgan and all of that stuff. So you took some pretty important photos, big ones that I've used in my picture library for sure. So, but mainly your claim to fame now is that you're running Wrestling for Charity, and as you said, you're getting close to a 20-year anniversary. When would the 20th anniversary be?
Spring of 2025 will be 20 years.
Wow.
We shall see. That's going to be an exciting event when it happens. So, slowly working on it.
Yeah. Well, if everyone that's tuned into this program has seen to my upper left-hand side, the Wrestling for, or right side, I guess, because it's reversed. But it sees the Wrestling for Charity logo that I've had up. I heard that you're working on a new one, actually, right?
It should be out there. It's more circular, kind of got rid of that funky shield type shape to make it a little more organic for social media posting and whatnot, since it's kind of oblong, being taller rather than wider. So it's updated a little bit.
Okay, I'm gonna have to go and put that in. Although this is the logo of the Fed that I was that I worked for, you know, when going back in the day. And yeah, you know, you have that list now that you're working on of all the matches that you've had.
Yeah, I started working on a list because I was like, you know, I'd really like to document how many events we've actually done. And I was shocked when I realized there's actually been 61 total events. And now looking back at those names, how many of those names that are currently on TV or really raking in the money overseas in Japan, on WWE, on AEW, or just out on the indies in general, in TV in general. It's pretty massive.
Yeah. I mean, do you want to remind the listeners and viewers of some of the names that we've worked with at WFC?
Sure. So probably the first one that most people are going to know is Bayley, formerly known as Davina Rose, who way back when was competing in intergender matches because there weren't a ton of female talent in the area. And then it just so happened that Wrestling for Charity was the very first place that she got to work as a heel outside of her home company. So we kind of set the tone for that. As we know, she's a pretty darn good heel. And
she's just
then
an
there's a whole
excellent person. She's just an excellent person.
all around.
When I worked the show with her, I was so impressed. I said, "You remind me of a young Sarah Del Rey," and I think
absolutely.
My words have been prophetic because she has turned into one of the top female talents in all of the world right now. You know, I mean, it's really great that she's been so successful. But you have a lot of other names on your card too.
Surprisingly, the list of female talent from Northern California is actually pretty remarkable. You've got Shotzi, who's on TV now, who we work with sporadically. You've got Thunder Rosa, who was an AEW Women's World Champion for a while, who just came back from a serious injury. And you got a lot of others that did some minor things on
Christina
TV
Von Eerie
for a short while.
Christina Von Eerie.
Right, Christina Von Eerie as well. Quite a list. Not to mention Sarah Del Rey, who's still back in WWE as a trainer.
And didn't you also have the girl that's now Holly Dead?
Holly Dead, yeah. She was still Holly Dead, Ben. She's doing a lot of TV work.
Yeah, and the Fallen Flower, Kikyo.
Kikyo, yeah. She's up in the Northwest now doing pretty good up there.
Yeah, so, it's been great that you've offered.
Candice LeRae.
Yeah, Candice LeRae, that's right.
Can't forget about her.
Yes.
Miss Gargano.
Yeah. And did you have cheerleader Melissa do any of your shows?
Actually, yes. Way before Wrestling for Charity was kind of its own entity, she did work. I need to add those two events because there were two all-pro wrestling events at De Anza that essentially put on that she was a part of. So, yeah, I'm actually forgetting. How can I forget? Cheerleader Melissa, the American Dragon Bryan Danielson, Super Dragon, Excalibur, all people who were essentially the precursor to Wrestling for Charity. And you got all your local names too. Vinny Massaro, Jardy France, Donovan Morgan, all were in
the Young Bucks too. Yeah, the Young Bucks on
Young Bucks were on one of the very first shows. Yep, along with some of their Southern California colleagues that are in Japan now. Sexy Sunny Sampson did pretty good in Japan. And I believe some of their brothers who are on AEW now, I think Trent Beretta and Chuck Taylor go that far back as well.
Wow, that's a rich history, actually.
Yeah, there's a few other names out there that were very successful that are kind of fell flat. I mean, can't forget Beltran, Bonsai Bruce, and can't forget Tom Castor, the referee. Can't also forget some of the names who people might want to forget, but you've got Drake Younger, you've got Joey Ryan, and I almost forgot Powerhouse Hobbs. Got guys like Mikey J, who are now doing big things with CWF from Hollywood.
Adam Thornstowe,
Lust of the Legend, had played a very important role at one point. Thunder Rosa took her first in-ring bump on a live show at Wrestling for Charity.
Wow, that's great. No, I mean, so tell the fans how Wrestling for Charity got started.
So essentially, in a nutshell, it's kind of funny. So I started way back when as a fan of all pro wrestling back in '90s when I was in high school. Started to build a connection with Roland Alexander at the time and got to do a little marketing work with them and started to get to know the guys and the girls. Got involved, ended up being ringside photographer for several years, which took me all over Northern California taking ringside photos. And I still remember to this day, it was Robert Thompson and the American Dragon. I had a photo shoot scheduled at APW up with the green screen. First time I've ever been paid for taking photos. They got together, pulled a little money, and hey, back then we're talking 2003. Somebody pulling $50 to $60, that's bigger than most indie payouts nowadays. That's not a hot dog and a handshake. So that's the kind of relationships they have built with the guys. And the guys and girls really appreciated the fact that they would ask what I thought about their matches and their gimmicks. And it was honest, constructive criticism and feedback rather than, oh, yeah, pat on the back, Barry Horowitz, amazing match, 5-star match. We're not Dave Meltzer here. We don't do 5-star matches if we don't think it's a 5-star match. So that eventually got going, and I started kind of evolving from taking just photos at APW, getting around to more independent stuff like BTW was out there. Then, as you know, CCW was formed, and you guys did a lot of great stuff down in the Central Valley I was part of with taking photos. And There was some unfortunate issues when I was a student in college. We brought all pro wrestling onto campus 2 consecutive years. The first year, I think it was just one match. It was supposed to be Jardy France and Donovan Morgan. They both got subpoenaed to go to Japan, to go wrestle in Japan. So it was Vinny Massaro and I believe Jay Jensen, who's up in the Pacific Northwest.
They weren't subpoenaed, by the way. It wasn't a court order that made them go to Japan.
Well, no, but I mean, are you going to turn down a Japanese book?
No,
when NJ, 200 people out of college.
Yeah, when Pro Wrestling Noah tells you they want you on the card, yeah, you go. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So, I mean, and no problem. Vinny put on one heck of a match, and that was kind of the starting point. And the year after, somehow we as college kids at the end are running a college campus club that was basically the precursor to Wrestling for Charity. We were the Wrestling Appreciation Club. We literally met twice a week on campus, watched professional wrestling videos. At the time, we were watching VHS tapes and high 8 tapes. We were studying to be quote unquote junior pro wrestlers at the time because most of us did get substantial training at one point or another. Some of us had 2 to 3 months of training. Some of us were very close to actually debuting at APW at one point. So we did our own little wrestling matches at campus without a ring on 2-inch thick gym mats. Yeah, probably lost some few brain cells on that, but we're still here. And the year after was when we had a full out show out in the main quad at De Anza on Memorial Day weekend. We did one or two matches of our own, and that's when we had Robert Thompson, Cheerleader Melissa, American Dragon, Larry Blackwell, Super Dragon, Excalibur. We're all part of that. I think
a lot of people don't remember that American Dragon is really Bryan Danielson.
Right. Daniel Bryan. People know him by different things. And we also, I think that show, we actually had a very young Pinoy boy at the time, TJ Perkins. And I believe we had a very young B-boy on the card as well. A lot of Southern California, because as you know, one of the things that Roland did at APW very well was bring in outside talent from outside of the direct area. So he was very good. And this is what sticks to me to this day. And part of my booking strategy is if you book the same talent versus the same talent over and over, people don't get better per se, and they're working the same can matches over and over. And yeah, you can work a match with the guy you trained with a dozen times blindfolded. You'll have a good match. But do you learn anything? Do you get a different perspective? Not really. So that's what kind of helped when I got into doing my own thing. And unfortunately, when we first started Wrestling for Charity, we actually did very small ministry shows at De Anza. There was a falling apart between me and somebody not to be named at APW that caused quite a rift for several years. I went on, continued doing my own thing, but I just used wrestling rings from other companies. The show you mentioned earlier with the Young Bucks, we used the Suburban Commandos ring at the time because there was no connection. And it was actually, around 2007 or 8, I had reconnected with Roland when the Nicholas Gordon benefit show was held in Brentwood, which was kind of an.
By the way, the Suburban Commandos, by the way, are the Stoner brothers now that run.
Exactly. Yeah, they run Hood Slam.
Yeah, I just, you're using terminology that like, I don't think people remember who the heck this. I mean, we remember them as the Suburban. I remember them as the Bad Apple Twins because that's
exactly. They were when back in the Brawl days.
Yeah, when I was managing them to the CCW title.
So once I reconnected with Roland, that was kind of funny because it essentially kind of created a little more of a spark, and I eventually had just agreed to pay him what was supposedly owed to him that he wasn't aware that somebody else took the money and never reported it to him. So I rebuilt that connection and kind of started moving along, and lo and behold, contacted a few different places, ended up doing some shows in the Bay Area, and now here we are another 15 years later. There's been 61 Wrestling for Charity events all over, from 12 different events in San Francisco that I don't think we discussed them on the show before, but they were probably the precursor to a lot of the events you see now that are Pride Night, celebrating Pride type events, because we were one of the innovators in allowing an on-screen drag queen character, Pollo Del Mar, who people may know the name now because he is now playing a very vital role with both Pro Wrestling Illustrated and the National Wrestling Alliance and still doing her thing with other local companies in Northern California and beyond, including Effie's Big Gay Brunch in Florida and other WrestleMania weekend activities that she'll be a part of. So there's one other name we totally forgot about. Speaking of San Francisco, people might remember Mantar Shali, who was shortly in WWE for a while. He was tag team partner of Richard Shineri, who at the time went by Theo Storis.
Oh, okay. Interesting. You see, yeah, I even lose track of some of these folks, but
that's precisely why I started to make a list of the events I've had with the results, because you lose track of how many people have come through their doors, and you've got a whole mix of people that have gone on to become world champions in the upper echelon of professional wrestling too. You've got journeyman veterans, guys like Dennis DeMarco, Jekyll's the Jester, Sir Samurai, who, if they were in a different era, would absolutely be on top of the world in the 70s and 80s.
Adam Forstow, another good example of that. Chupacabra.
Definitely. I still have no idea why he never got a big fair shake in somewhere like TNA. He would have been a prime candidate for modern AEW.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if AEW had come around a few years before, and giving opportunities to smaller guys. I mean, there was no bet, and also our dearly departed Virgil Flynn. Those two guys could have really made a huge impact. And you've seen also Timothy Thatcher, who
that's another name. Yep, I never got to work with him personally on my events, but he's definitely a NorCal Hall of Famer for sure.
I know, it's amazing to see him and what he's accomplished now. Because you worked with him at CCW when you got to meet him a number of times at CCW when he worked our shows in the middle of California. Yeah, so tell me what some of the challenges of trying to put. I mean, now you've done 61 different events, and you've got one coming up. We'll talk about, but tell me about some of the challenges in putting together this event.
The biggest thing was, COVID was a big hindrance to events, because not only did it, with us being shut down.
Oops.
So not only did it temporarily shut everybody down, what it did was venues are very reluctant to host events with quote unquote high attendance because of COVID. And in the meantime, their rental rates absolutely skyrocketed to just the wazoo. So you're talking,
because they were holding so few events. Every event they did, they had to charge so much more to make up for.
Exactly. So now venues that would be somewhat affordable are charging a lot. And then now there's a lot more red tape with documentation of vaccinations, whatnot. So it's very hard market to find venues. A lot of smaller venues have been shut down, of course, because they had basically 2 to 3 years where they could only have private events of very limited capacity. So you're pretty much limited to basically the brew houses, the pubs, some nightclubs, of course. You're not really going to walk into a high school gym and book it now, because they're basically booking amateur stuff year round now to avoid any outside rentals. You've got basketball leagues booking up the gyms year round. So it is very difficult to find a connection at any sort of a venue, unless you own your own place, like they have at Pacheco Square Garden, for example, where they kind of do what APW used to do in the garage, where it's a small venue and you can run your own events as you wish.
CCW did that with that warehouse.
Exactly. Yeah, and it served its purpose. So there's a lot of stuff in the work with different venues, but there is a lot of organizational red tape of dates available. You've got venues that say, oh yeah, we're available on Saturday, but then they'll tell you, oh, we're only available from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Well, I don't think a 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. event's going to be too successful in the Bay Area, but that really pushes a timeline on things. So finding availability of venue, and then of course, once you get the venue, booking talent is probably the absolute easiest thing, but the venue is the absolute hardest thing to come across. You just don't walk into a venue, say, hey, I'd like to do this event. And then not to mention, they all want a $2 million insurance policy that sets you back $400 just to get in the door.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, But when you talk about booking talent, you know, you've had a really good hand at it. How do you succeed in getting the big names that you have on your show?
Well, so it's a number of things. One is I'm always going to go back to reaching out to my veterans and peers around me that I know have a good grasp of things. So a guy like Chicano Flame, a guy like, Reno Scum, those guys that have been around, guys like the Honor Society, guys like Jekyll's who know the local talent, that they've trained themselves. And you have to go to other events, kind of scout, see what guys are doing, see how the crowd reacts to them, because I think a lot of people forget is anybody can really put together a card of 5 to 7 wrestling matches, but can you put together a strong enough variety of talent where you've got a good mix that can catch everybody's eye? Like you're going to need to have an opening match that's high quality, that gets attention quick, fast paced match. Prime example that I'll always tell people would be Sheik Kanabati and Jardy France. That is your ideal opening match. Our modern or current might be, say, Marcus Lewis versus a guy like Dom Sears, two younger, high flying guys that are high energy, get the crowd into it, pump up the crowd. You know this because of your work at CCW. Your opening match is your second most important match of the night, if not your most important match of the night, aside from the main event. Um, and just knowing your talent's ability. I mean, who do they have good matches with? And we've all booked. I'm not perfect. I've booked duds and duds and duds. And
Well,
for every
sometimes
five
curtain
duds,
jerking, sometimes I think that, curtain jerking, depending on what show, your first match can sometimes not be all that great because it's a lot of times they book a squash because they want, people to get in their seats and, people, late arrivers, you
well,
know.
that's what one thing I think you were at the St. John Vianney shows in San Jose. One thing we did there was we did the pre-show dark matches, which help out a lot. It's becoming more and more common where you do quote unquote preliminary matches that they're not curtain jerker matches, but they are matches to put a couple of younger guys out there. You hear the thud on the canvas, you hear the ropes being run. It encourages people to come in the doors. Go get your drinks, go get your food, come sit down. We're starting before the show starts. That's been a kind of common thing, just like regular dark matches on a TV taping. So, but the biggest challenge is just matching up your talent. So, one thing, whenever I had champions, I'd always ask them, who would you like to wrestle? Who haven't you wrestled that you'd like to work? And if you ask that question to a guy like a Jekyll's or a Timothy Thatcher or a Jeff Cobb, they're going to have names off the top of their head say, hey, actually in 10 years, I've actually never worked Chupacabra. Like I did a festival at the end of last year in Livingston, the Sweet Potato Festival. I somehow got lucky. I was able to book Vinny Massaro versus Chupacabra versus Boyce LeGrand. I don't know if that match has ever been booked anywhere or those guys have ever worked each other in a 3-way or 4-way, but they had so much fun with that match. And you need your talent to be able to have organic fun in the ring as well. Because some guys are going to say, oh, you're booking me with that guy? Well, maybe there's a reason to it. And I can use an example. We had a guy, a lot of people talk down about him, huge dude, Clay Tauser. I think he was trained by Billy Blade down in the Central Valley. You worked with him at a couple of shows, I believe. Huge, monstrous of a man, was about 6'4", 350 pounds. Think earthquake tugboat type size. He had a masked gimmick. He wasn't that good in the ring, but to suspend the disbelief, you sometimes have to think like a fan. What is a child or a young adult going to see when they see this big monster walking at them? It was just like you, a Super Destroyer 2000. You take this amazingly gentleman of a man, Mark Bison Smith, put a mask on him, no music, and he just walks to the ring with his manager with a death stare. He was feared by the fans before he even stepped in the ring. And that's another challenge of booking. You can put two guys in there that can wrestle great, but are you going to do 7 matches like that? No, because fans will get bored unless you're catering to a Japanese style crowd, which sometimes it happens. They're into that shoot style, strong style. So I always try to ensure that I have a high paced opening match, a slower match to follow that builds a story that's been evolving for some time. Obviously, there has to be a main event that's a main event for a reason, not just, oh, Joe is wrestling John just because. There's just no logic. And I have had the unfortunate task of having to book standalone events at different venues. So you have to be very creative with how is the audience going to understand who am I cheering for? Who am I supposed to boo? And one of the things that I know I do with the guys, I don't know if this is like this in many places, I encourage the guys to kind of go off the script that time. So say Chupacabra is booked as a heel, but he walks through the curtain and is just automatically getting tremendous cheers. He's not going to want to veer from that. I mean, there's ways to work around that with solid performers, but let your trained professionals do their job. And I think this even goes to all the way up to AEW and WWE is you can have orders for match finishes. You can have orders for times. Sometimes you just have to let the guys go out there and be flexible with what they're doing. And the girls too, of course.
So, but tell me, like some upcoming things that Wrestling for Charity is planning on doing. You have some great projects. I want people to know.
First and foremost, the biggest thing that I'm super excited for is I'm finally working on incorporating Wrestling for Charity as a 501c3 nonprofit. We've always operated as a not-for-profit, which legally anybody can do, but we have never operated for myself to make money in the pocket like most promoters. It's just not me. I want to share with the community. Second, we are starting a literacy project, which is actually going to start on, of all days, was kind of funny, is 420 on Saturday, April 20th. Chicano Flame will be the lead character for this. We're going to be doing book readings at libraries. This particular one will be in Gilroy. There'll be a book reading. There'll be pictures with him and stuff after. And then following that, not too long after, we will be having a mini wrestling demonstration, Lucha Libre, with 1 or 2 matches with some luchadors just to follow up on the storyline. And we are reading a book that's bilingual, English and Spanish, and that's a very big community there. So that's the first of what is more than likely to be several of these type events. There's several events that are just waiting for the I's to be dotted and the T's to be crossed with agreements with venues and facilities and whatnot, the usual red tape stuff. Obviously, I'll have the Sweet Potato Festival coming up later this year, which we've over the years have increased from 1 day to 2 days to 3 days of entertainment. And last year was the most successful yet. That was the show that had Boyce LeGrand versus Vinny Massaro versus Chupacabra. So that has evolved from literally just 3 to 4 matches on a hot Saturday afternoon in the sun, where we have now become the featured entertainment under the lights, which is amazing. And there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff. So there'll be a lot more events coming out. But that April 20th, the literacy project, the book reading, and that small event will just be the tip of the iceberg.
Do you still look back on the Great America show as the best one that you've done now?
I wouldn't say the best show, because there's been shows that have far surpassed that as far as quality and overall, but that is definitely a landmark one, because to this day, there are not many people that can say they've held a professional wrestling event at a theme park in Northern California. They have been done outside of California, but there were some of the wrestlers on that show. We really thought that day we were going to have them get on the loudspeakers and say, "Wrestler A, please come to the ring. Your match is going to be up in 5 minutes. If you're on a roller coaster, please disembark the ride and come to the wrestling ring."
Yes, that was, and I also remember it was so hot on that on that day.
Poor Corvus wrestled without a shirt that day, no sunscreen. He became a living, breathing tomato. It was, I think it hit 105, and it just so happened to be a bright red canvas, and we were literally in the middle of the hot sun, where what used to be the Great America Presidential Monuments, which is now the Gold Striker roller coaster.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, because I remember that the wrestlers were saying the bumps didn't hurt so much. It was that landing on the canvas and lying on the canvas was like 130 degrees,
Yeah.
It was basically cooking them while they were when they landed on the mat and had to deal with the heat. But I managed at that show, and it was great. I did the Christina.
Looking back at that show had a young Davina Rose, now known as Bailey.
Yeah.
Christina Von Eerie.
Yes.
Jody Christopherson.
Yes.
Nino Scum.
Yep.
Did anybody else from that show end up?
Cobb, I think, was on there.
Wise Guy was on there way back when, who's a guy who absolutely should be on TV right now. Very unfortunate he's not on TV, but...
Wise Guy was Elgin, right?
No, Wise Guy, Nick Ruiz.
Oh, Nick Reese. That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Okay. Yeah.
Still wrestling to this day. He should be on TV. He's one of the most solid guys you'll find.
Yeah, he was really. And Mike Rain was there, and I mean, you
Yep.
had a lot of great talent. That's one thing, is that you were always like, when there's APW and there's BTW and there were like a lot of other little feds, but you attracted wrestlers from every single fed. There was never like any lines or any sort of partisanship with WWC.
This just goes back to Roland with what he did with bringing outside talent. It's just my thing. I don't want to be the same as every other show out there. I don't want to duplicate what, say, APW was doing, because if I do that, how am I selling the show? How am I different? There's no difference. I want first time matches. I want to see B-Boy versus Sledge that had never happened before. I want to see Jekyll's versus, there's another name we forgot to mention. Jekyll's at one point defended the WFC title against Willie Mack.
Yeah, what a great guy. I love Jekyll's. I should get him on the show.
Matches, I mean, not even mentioning we paired up Gangrel with Chupacabra, the Famed Warriors, which is a tag team. To this day, I don't know why any big name companies have not ran with that tag team, because that is just pure gold if anybody ever ran with it.
I agree. I totally agree with you. So how could fans find out about Wrestling for Charity and the events that are going on?
Well, that little icon in your upper corner right there, that website still works, wfcwrestling.com, or just search Wrestling for Charity. It'll pop up on Twitter and Facebook. I got to do a little better on Instagram, but...
how about the videos on YouTube?
Yeah, they can look them up on YouTube. There's a lot of stuff on YouTube. Got to do better with it. But yeah, we're Wrestling for Charity on YouTube as well. If you search Venice DeMarco versus Rikishi, you'll find us.
Now I'm going to ask the most important question of the interview, okay? And it's going to be one that's going to be a lot of controversy, all right? Should the Niners have kicked off in overtime, or should they have received?
They should have kicked off.
And why is that?
So that way they only had to match what the other team did instead of allowing the other team to go and have full control of the game, which is what happened.
But the 49ers had a lead. They had the 3-point lead. That's all you should need with one of the best defenses in the league, or supposely. And you can't
hold Mahomes. What can I say?
You can't hold Mahomes. You can't. You held him to like 3 points in the first half, and then you let him have another 20 in the second.
Mahomes is kind of what Brady used to do, just picking people apart little by little, and now you give him another big weapon. That's going to be crazy next year.
I'm still not over the Super Bowl. It's
nobody
still
is.
No.
Unless you're a Kansas City fan.
I need the Giants to win a World Series and the Warriors to win another championship to make up for the Super Bowl that we didn't get. Like last night I was haunted about I can't believe we lost in overtime. I did. Like before I was going to bed, I was like, I can't believe it. The Niners are not.
Yeah, cheating. There's that extra point.
That extra point. The bounce off of the back of the leg, the fumble.
But in his credit, he did kick that 50-some yarder to keep us in the game after that. So
I'm less upset about that than I am about the Niners defense not holding Mahomes with a 3-point lead, and that fumble off the back of the punt.
That was ridiculous.
That it just is still in my nightmares. That's right there with the Kyle Williams dropped.
Hey, pretty close, yeah.
Or the Roger Craig fumble in in the New York Giants game, the playoff game in 1991. So just wanted to throw that in there while I could, because I don't know who else is a bigger Niner fan than me, but you're pretty darn close, I got to admit.
I can't say I'm as big as you. I watch and follow, but They're not fans of me right now, that's for sure.
People don't know how many Facebook messages we've sent back and forth with each other during the games themselves, where we're like panicking over, hey, is Deebo Samuel going to break one for a big timer? What's Christian McCaffrey going to do, or something like that? So anyway, it's great to get back in touch with you. I mean, we talk all the time. We never talk like this, and I
exactly.
think that you've been really helpful, and you've really explained a lot of things that I hope the fans will get a lot out of. And so, we'll have you back on the show again, especially when we get closer to, some of these other big showtimes. Hopefully maybe one featuring Mr. Buddy Sotelo himself. So
that will happen sometime soon. Crossing fingers. We're trying, right?
I would be really excited to manage again sometime. That would really be a kick.
Especially in the North Bay area.
Yes. So we'll keep working on that. Great to see you. Have a great rest of the weekend, and I'll talk to you again soon, especially online.
Yep. Okay. We'll see you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.
Show.